Doug Ford talks publicizing a damning report on long-term care. Andrea Horvath takes aim at provincial handling of long-term care. And Porter shuts down flights to Muskoka. All that and more coming up right now. Welcome to Cogeco News for May the 26th. I'm James Bowler with what's happening in your community. So Muskoka continues to avoid any new confirmed infections of COVID-19 for about 2 weeks now, as the new report comes from the Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. During today's media call, I had an opportunity to ask again why Muskoka has decided to stick with an appointment-based protocol for the 2 local COVID-19 assessment centers, which goes against Premier Ford's call to allow for walk-in testing.
You know, one of the reasons for appointments is infection control. I mean, you still wouldn't want these sites to become sites where people could get inadvertently exposed. So by setting up appointments, that's one of the ways in which they can stagger people coming through, manage the flow, and avoid people having face-to-face encounters with other potential clients, and therefore maintaining it a safe environment. That's always going to be important. In fact, it will always be the single most important thing about the operation of these premises. And I would continue to support them in that because of the prime importance of infection control, of them being safe. So, you know, they're all, I think, going to have to grapple with, I'm sure, a lot of questions now about changes in their operation. Do they do less in the way of assessment? Do they do less in the way of screening, that it's more of a testing center and not so much an assessment center? These are things they're going to have to figure out. And how would they handle drop-ins? Are they able to sometimes squeeze them in, or do they simply note the time that they could come back, essentially drop in for a booking, but they have to come back? They're going to have to work those. We're all together, is I guess I'm going to say, have to work those and many other things out with this change and with the broader strategy to come.
Meanwhile, long-term care is once again the hot topic amid COVID-19, as supposedly damning evidence from the Canadian military on 5 long-term care homes is being released by the Ontario government. Ford and his team were visibly shaken by the results of these reports.
I'm putting everything on the table here. The public needs to know exactly what I found out yesterday afternoon. After the press conference, I got briefed on this, and it was gut-wrenching. When I say gut-wrenching, I was up, and I'm sure everyone was up, I was up all night thinking of this. And there was a crisis, and I've said there's a crisis in these long-term care homes. The question is, how are we going to fix the problem? We will fix the problem with the support of the federal government.
I came here and had the privilege of becoming Ontario's Minister of Long-Term Care, the only Minister of Long-Term Care in all of Canada, thanks to Premier Ford. We were shining the light on this. We were looking at fixing a system that had been neglected and ignored for decades. And then COVID. And COVID tipped the homes that were having difficulties with staffing already right over the edge. So this has been something a long time coming, and I am determined, our government is determined and committed to fix this problem once and for all. And that's why we're going to have a commission. We also have short-term solutions, medium-term solutions, and long-term solutions.
Now, the Ford government is sticking with its plan to move forward with an independent review of the long-term care home system, a decision coming with heavy criticism from the NDP. And after the break, I'll have more details on why the NDP feels this is a bad decision. Stay with us. Welcome back. Well, Ontario NDP leader Andrea Horwath is now calling on the Ford government to take over all unsafe long-term care homes during the COVID-19 pandemic. The opposition leader took to Zoom earlier today, just before the Ford government released this damning report from the military on long-term care, for a press conference, and it was joined by two Ontarians who wanted to share their experiences with long-term care recently.
I have to say that I feel that Ontarians are united in calling on the Ford government to do a better job by starting to take over some of these long-term care facilities that are unsafe. We know that there are unsafe facilities out there, and Mr. Ford is not doing what he needs to do to protect seniors and staff by going in and taking over those facilities. You know, we know that there have been cracks in our long-term care system for a very long time. And for, decades, we've been trying to get governments to address them, but instead the cracks that existed in the system have widened into chasms, and that's just, what we're facing. And so, of course, when we have government after government sweeping the problems under the rug when it comes to the long-term care system, we were in a state of of a disaster waiting to happen, really. The status quo of seniors living in long-term care over the last number of decades has been terrible. And it's culminated in our government's response now, the Ford government's response to this pandemic as being a complete failure. So what we know is that Ontarians believe, and rightfully so, that we can do better and should be doing better for the seniors that built this province, that literally raised us all up and built our province. This is not the best that we can do for them. So the government needs to act much more quickly and urgently to stamp out COVID-19 in every hotspot area that we have.
My mother moved into Extended Care Guildwood on March 13th. 8 weeks later, she was dead from COVID-19. The day after my mom moved in, the facility was locked down, so we thought that she would be safe there. She wasn't. They should have called us to come and get her out. We were not notified of the outbreak that began on April 24th. Had they told us, we would have picked her up and brought her home. I received a call on May 7th informing me that my mom had a fever. The nurse told me that my mom's two roommates had tested positive for COVID. I was shocked and horrified. She should never have been left in a room with infected people. My mom's condition would worsen quickly. She was taken to the hospital, returned to the home, and then taken back to the hospital on May 11th. She died the next day, 5.5 days after we found out that an outbreak had been raging through the home, and we did not know.
My mother had a man stumble into her room a week ago and get into her bed drooling. Was he positive? He probably didn't know. He has dementia. There was a man half naked in the hall. Was he positive or negative? We don't know. So anyway, from my perspective, they can't keep my mom safe because they don't know her status for sure. She's symptom free. I'm the lucky one. I have an option. I have to get her out of there because I have no confidence that she can remain free of this virus.
This press conference comes just a few days after I had an opportunity to speak to MPP Horwath about the Ford government's decision to shoot down the NDP's call for a public inquiry into long-term care homes, instead favoring an internal investigation.
It doesn't have the same transparency. It doesn't have the same powers overall to compel witnesses and documents. It doesn't, have the openness of allowing for people's voices to be heard in the process. And for all of those reasons, it's the wrong thing to do. A government, backroom controlled process is not what people deserve. And look, we know that this is the kind of thing Doug Ford prefers. He likes to do things in the back rooms. He's done that from day one. It's always been about backroom decisions and backroom appointments and backroom insiders who've had his ear. And unfortunately, It's not unfortunately. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just shocking that he would think that this is all Ontarians deserve when it comes to the tragedies, the horrifying tragedies that have ripped through our long-term care system. And everybody knows that system was in crisis for decades. And so that's why we're saying, this needs to be completely open. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be public, and it needs to be a public inquiry, which will go everywhere it needs to go to finally admit and acknowledge and lay bare the crisis in long-term care. And the only thing that's going to do that is a full public inquiry. And the Liberals should have done it with the Wettlaufer murders, right? I mean, that was a terrible situation. And we tried to get the Liberals to just crack that open and have that hard look at long-term care a couple of years ago, and they didn't. And that's shameful. But it doesn't have to mean, and this is what the government's hiding behind, and they're wrong, it doesn't have to mean a public inquiry that we wait for a couple of years before we make any changes. Quite the opposite. In fact, when we were in the legislature the other day, we asked the government right then and there, we had a private member's bill ready to go to guarantee 4 hours of hands-on care for every single resident of long-term care. We've been asking for that for over a decade. The NDP has for over a decade. We've been asking for it for so long that the acuity levels in residents have gotten worse. And where we used to ask for 3.5 hours of long-term of hands-on care, we're now asking for 4. My point being, we can make those changes now, and in a full public inquiry, it can be a find and fix inquiry, where every time we find the problem and an interim solution or an interim report can be generated, that solution can be implemented right away. We also need to look at the role of for-profit companies in long-term care. And I fear that that's one of the things that this government wants to avoid, because their former premier, Mike Harris, sits at the head of one of the biggest long-term care private companies called Chartwell. He's the one that started privatizing long-term care in the first place. Lots of money is being made by the friends of conservatives who are now lobbying the conservative government not to have I would suspect not to have a full public inquiry. I mean, all of a sudden, 4 big conservative insiders have been registering as lobbyists, and all of a sudden, this decision comes up to do a commission and not a public inquiry. It seems a bit suspicious to me. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
And tomorrow we'll have an opportunity to hear from a local long-term care executive on how they feel about this internal review versus a public inquiry. So tune in for that at 5 p.m. Well, this pandemic is certainly causing some... Sorry, we are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. And as I was about to allude to before the break, this pandemic is certainly causing some misery for our tourism sector, and especially getting in tourists into Muskoka. COVID-19 has claimed another tourism operation in Muskoka, this time in the air service sector. Porter Airlines announced today that it is officially canceling all summer season flights from Toronto to Muskoka amid the COVID-19 restrictions. The airliner has also been forced to push back its resumption of all flights to the end of July because of restrictions at the border. This comes just a year after the first season of summer flights to Muskoka successfully kicked off, bringing more and easier travel opportunities to those wishing to visit cottage country. And joining me now from the Huntsville Lake of Bays Chamber of Commerce is Kelly Haywood. Kelly, appreciate you taking the time today.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to be talking about a request that the Chamber is putting out to all levels of government. Now, just backing up a step here, we're talking about how business is impacted by COVID-19 currently, and we're looking to the future as well, because we know that this is going to be an issue well into next year. So the Chamber has put together a pretty well-researched request, as mentioned, to all levels of government. So can you kind of give me a Cole's notes here, Kelly, of what we're looking at in this request?
Sure. Yeah, so this letter actually came from a development out of a number of roundtables that were hosted by all levels of government that we've participated in over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Essentially, each level of government has come to the Huntsville business community in some capacity to get a sense and gauge what our business community needs. So we responded by sort of pulling together one whole comprehensive response to every level of government at once, breaking it down by municipal, provincial, and federal government, and district actually, with some fairly specific requests.
So as I'm looking at this letter, I'm seeing a lot of comprehensive breakdowns of what the future of business could be looking like in Huntsville. And interestingly, a lot of that is to do with still the physical distancing and also the sort of sanitary aspect of how we're dealing with the world right now. How does that factor in? In your mind, how does shopping downtown maybe look, 6 months from now?
And you're right. I mean, there are still so many unknowns. But with respect to, all of the requirements from a health and safety PPE perspective, our shopping, dining, traveling experiences are going to continue to look, I think, very similar to the way they do today, frankly. And that will make it very challenging for a lot of businesses to conduct their business the way they're used to and to anticipate the revenue streams that they need to survive.
Kelly, what kind of dollar figure are we looking at right now in terms of, how much you're going to be needing to implement a lot of these protocols that you're looking to put in place? And which levels are you looking to get money from as well again?
Yeah, that is a really tough question, because the guidelines haven't entirely been set, but I can give you a number. Like, I do know a few businesses who have spent well over $10,000 to prepare themselves just for the summer. That is an enormous amount of money for a business who hasn't been making any money, since March. And who knows when some of them, and those that are starting to reopen slowly are in such short increments. It's making it very challenging, not only to the fact that they have no revenue, but they're not, this is an unbudgeted expense for many businesses, and it's not cheap.
So do you have an idea of how much? I know there's a few asks at different levels here. You're going to council tomorrow in Huntsville. Again, what kind of numbers are we looking at in that sense?
So for PPE, we requested some sort of program where the municipality subsidizes businesses for the PPE. They have budgeted about $500,000 for business support. We don't have a number, I'm afraid, but what we did say was that they prioritize that particular ask in terms of subsidy for PPE as a number one priority. So I would anticipate that the lion's share of their, if one business is spending $10,000 and we're looking at 70% of the businesses that may need to access it because they're having that's a great deal of money. We don't have enough money in this community to actually subsidize it entirely, but it may be a grant to a business. So I mean, the amount of money the municipality put aside was $500,000, and I'm certain that the business community can certainly utilize that entire amount.
Well, Kelly, there's a lot to break down here, a lot of interesting facts on what we could be seeing in the near future, talking about relief from HST, rental rates, things like that. We will maybe look into this a little more in depth, but we know tomorrow you're going to be meeting with council and hoping for good news from that. And we'll check in with you again to see where we're at in the near future.
Sounds good. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Kelly. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. Well, it might look a little bit different, but the good news is the Gravenhurst Farmers Market is returning very soon.
It was only a couple months ago that the farmers market approached the town to inquire if they can proceed or not with their market this year. And at that time, restrictions were tight at the provincial level, and we were fearful that it wouldn't happen in our community this year. But with the province lifting restrictions and allowing farmers markets to operate in the same fashion as a grocery store, we invited the market to give us a plan on how they were to implement the COVID-19 parameters, and we've run that plan by the health unit, and they've given us the green light. So very hopeful and very happy that the market, despite everything else this year, has been closed down in our community, which is sad news for us. The market will be open, but they will be open only to sell local food, and it will be quite the different experience than what you're used to. Some examples this year: there'll be controlled access to the market. There'll be sanitization stations put out throughout. There'll be separation between the vendor and the purchaser. There'll be no giveaways this year. So the market right now is scheduled to open June 3rd. Prior to June 3rd opening, we will be touching base again with the market to make sure that everything's still applicable to what they're doing in accordance with the health unit. The market itself is located in Gravenhurst at the sports field. Parking will be permitted at the parking lot, but you can expect that you will have to queue up similar as you would into a grocery store like you're experiencing now.
Well, that's great. I'm really looking forward to getting some farm fresh food. We're taking our last break, but when we come back, a recap of what made headlines today. Welcome back. Here's a look at the headlines today. The Ford government publicizes a damning report against 5 different long-term care homes in Ontario after the military investigated these homes. This comes after the Ontario government plans to do an independent review into long-term care in Ontario, a move the Ontario NDP calls another way of conducting backroom deals. And our tourism sector continues to suffer as Porter Airlines axes any flights to Muskoka amid COVID-19. The Huntsville Lake of Bays Chamber of Commerce is also getting creative, looking at how future business will be conducted in Muskoka. That's Cogeco News. For more information on the program, head over to yourtv.tv or connect with us on social media by searching Your TV Muskoka. And remember to watch us live at 5, Monday to Thursday. From everyone here at Cogeco News, thanks for watching. Have a good night.